So the internals have finally showed up for the Lowbuck forged LQ4 build. I'm going to show you guys what we went with and how we arrived at those decisions. So first up, ended up having the crank turned 10 thousandths on the mains and polished. Got that back from my neighbor a couple doors down that does the crank work. That came out good. This is the Gen 4 LS3 crank that came out of that aluminum block engine. So we initially were planning to use that crank in the Gen 4 rods. That's kind of been the plan the whole time. But one of my primary goals for the build was to get forged pistons installed. So basically we had some decisions to make once we got the information back from the machine shop in terms of the block and what we found there. So these are my measurements. Basically, they're in line with what the machine shop found, which is good news for me. It means that I guess I know how to measure with the dial bore gauge. It's pretty accurate. So the block ended up being about 2 thousandths over 4 inch. So had a little bit of wear. Out around was pretty good. Had about, a little less than 1 thousandths out around. But long story short, it was going to need to be bored because of the wear. If you try to run a 4-inch piston in it, there was just enough wear on the cylinder walls that your piston to wall clearance would have been outside of tolerance, and you probably would have had a little bit of noise or maybe some piston slap when it was cold. So the right answer is taking that block oversized. So that left us with some decisions to make for the internals. So I made some notes here, and I'll put these up on the screen and kind of walk you guys through how I arrived at the decision on this one. So initially, I was kind of hoping to run the Wiseco True Street pistons. They offer a 4-inch bore piston with ring pack and everything at $655.99 retail. That was kind of like the best price for pistons and rings that I could find, and that's initially what I was hoping I could run. But once we heard back from the machine shop and realized we needed to go 5 over at minimum to clean it up, those were out because they don't make those in a 5 over piston. I would have had to bore that block to at least 4030 in order to run Wiseco True Street, just based on what they offer. They offered 4-inch, or they offered 30 thousandths over bore size. So one of the other factors that steered me away from the Wiseco True Street pistons was that they come with a 945 pin. That's not a problem for the press pin, Gen 3 rods, but the Gen 4 rods take a 943 pin because they're full floating. So if we went with the Wiseco True Street, not only would we have the additional cost to bore, but we also would have to hone the small end of the rods and open those up to 945, which would have added another $160 in machine costs. So just to go with Wiseco True Street, even if we could fit the 4-inch bore, we were looking at $815 between the cost of the pistons and the machine work to take them to 945, the Gen 4 rods to 945. So if it's $655 plus the cost of bore, it would have been about $970 total cost difference for me versus some other options. So at that point, I started looking at Summit Pro LS pistons. Now, those are a pretty good value. Those retail, depending on your options, around $622.99. But you have $147.99 for rings, so you're looking at about a total cost of $770 retail. That kind of left me at the Summit LS, because at $770 with rings, that was a better deal than $815, and I didn't have to have the rods machined because the Summit Pro LS was offered with a 943 pin that would have been drop-in with the Gen 4 rods. So I was kind of leaning that route. I had the conversation with the machine shop. I was ready to order pistons, and I started looking through the options one last time before I made that final decision. And I started realizing that I could get into pistons with the 927 aftermarket rod pin size for a lot better cost than I could the ones that fit factory Gen 4 rods. So that's how I got turned on to the Icon Forge pistons, which I knew about them before. I had to put my eyes on them a couple of times, and I really like that they're manufactured by UEM. It's a brand that I trust. They also manufacture like Silverlight replacement pistons, and I think they do some manufacturing for some OEM suppliers as well. But they're a large company. They've been around a long time. They do some great work. So I started looking at the icon options, and if I was willing to go to an aftermarket 6125 rod with a 927 pin, then I could get into the icons for $450 for the pistons, plus the cost for the ring pack. So if you call that $550, that's quite a bit less than the $770 for the Summit Pro LS. Now, of course, that means that we also would have to purchase 6125 rods, because you can't run those icons on the stock 6098 Gen 4 connecting rod, which, although the plan the whole time was to run the Gen 4 rods, and I had even cleaned those up and got them ready to go, and I was pretty confident that's the route that I was going to take. At the cost for those icon pistons, I started looking at, okay, well, what about putting forged H-beams in this thing, and what's the actual cost difference going to be after you consider all of the factors? Where would we land for a cost difference? So I started doing the math. I could get into the icon 4005 forged piston set up for the 6125 rod, and pair that up with LPC forged H-beams at a total retail cost of about $1,100, including the rings. Now, if you play your sales and stuff, you might be able to get that even closer to $1,000 with the ring pack, and you're really starting to close the gap there. I mean, you're talking about, less than, basically a $330 difference to go to forged rod versus the Summit Pro LS all-in cost. So that's the route I went. In fact, my wholesale cost on the icon pistons and the LPC rods together ended up being a lot better than what my wholesale cost would have been on the Pro LS. So for me, the actual out-of-pocket cost difference ended up being even narrower. I paid basically about $125 more for the icon rods the icon pistons and the LPC rods compared to what I would have paid for just the Summit Pro LS pistons and rings. So that's what I ended up going with, and that's what I've got on the desk here. So we've got the icon forged 5-over pistons and Hastings ring pack for those, and the LPC forged H-beams. Just a note on the decision to go 5-over on this instead of boring it to 10 over, 20 over, 30 thousandths over. That decision mostly stemmed from saving costs at the machine shop. So if I wanted to bore this and hone it with a torque plate, the cost to do so was $455. But if we just honed it 5 thousandths with a torque plate, I saved $155 by not actually boring it out. So I was fine with that. I know that we're calling this low buck, and a lot of you guys are going to have some pushback saying, well, you're putting, pistons, rods, all this in this engine, and you're driving the cost up. Again, I'm trying to compare the cost of this to that ATK short block, and my goal for the whole project was to come in at a lower cost than that engine from ATK or from Summit, wherever you source it from, but to be able to do so with better components. So, 4340 forged H-beam, 4032 forged pistons, good rings, compared to using factory stuff and a hyper-eutectic piston. Yes, there's going to be some additional cost. Are we still going to come in under that target? I definitely think so. The goal has kind of been to come in halfway. We'll just have to see once all the dust settles where the total cost lands. But I think we're going to be close to that. We'll just have to see how it plays out. But let's get these unboxed, show you guys what we've got going on, let you take a look at them, and we'll go from there. All right, let's do a little unboxing here so you can see how these parts are packaged up, see what they look like, and see what we went with. So first up, I'm going to unbox these LPC rods. Again, we went with the Pro Series 4340 forged H-beam. I went with the standard 8740 ARP 7/16 bolt option. They are also offered with ARP 2000s or L19s if you're looking to hold a little bit more power. That wasn't needed for me, so to keep the cost down, standard 8740 rod bolts are fine. The 7/16 diameter is still going to be a huge upgrade over the factory rod bolt size, in addition to obviously this being a nicer H-beam forged connecting rod design. So these take the aftermarket 927 pin size. They are the 6/125 length that you need, that standard aftermarket rod length for the LS engine. So let's take a look at these. It's going to come with all of your information regarding torque specs and installation instructions. Looks like we got maybe some stickers in there and the warranty info. And then all of the rods are individually bagged. We got some ARP lube there for torquing them. All 8 connecting rods in place. I did already get into this, just checking them in, and got one open, so we can take a look at that one. Pretty much what you expect to see in an aftermarket H-beam. You see the ARP bolts there. Nice piece. Now these retail, I think, starting right around $560, which, I mean, you can't beat them at that price compared to a lot of the other H-beam options out there. I mean, they're a very cost-effective rod from a reputable brand. I've worked with Liberty for a while. I trust their components. Met with their reps out at PRI. Got hands-on with a lot of stuff. They really make some nice stuff, and their price point is pretty good compared to some of the other options. So you can take a look at this next to the factory Gen 4 rod. You see a lot more material in the neck there, of course, and then a lot more material around the bottom side and around those bolts. And then you can see how much bigger those bolts are. I don't have the specs on the factory bolt offhand. They're probably like 5/16 or so. But you can see that the ARP rod bolts in the LPC rods are significantly larger. All right, let's take a look at the pistons next. All right, we've got the Icon forged pistons for the combination. Take a look at the specs here. So these are designed for the being 5/0 on the 4-inch bore base engine. They take the 6/125 rod, factory 3.622 stroke length, 1.304 compression height, which when you do all that math, that lands you pretty much at the same amount of stick out as a factory piston would. They're 40-32. They come with your spiral locks for the wrist pins. They come with the pins, and they're designed to take the 1.5 millimeter compression, 1.5 millimeter second ring, and the 3 millimeter oil control ring pack. So let's get these open and take a look at these. So again, I did check these in already, so we don't have to completely cut this open. Packed real nice. They're all insulated here, so they can't move around, bang around. They come with your instructions, give you information on how to install the wrist pin retaining springs, spiral locks, or C-clips. Got some other info there. It's got your orientation notes, application guides. Here's the most important thing you look for when you buy pistons. That's got the manufacturer's recommended piston to wall clearance for whichever piston set that you bought, and it tells you what your intended usage is, how you should set up your wall clearance when you're doing the block machining. So definitely an important piece of info to have with your pistons. You've got your lock rings in here. Of course, it comes with some stickers and probably some warranty info. Or no, that's a California notice, because of course they cause cancer, but only in California. These are a really nice piston option. I'm impressed with what Icon or UAM can offer for you at this price point. You can see here they've got pretty sizable valve relief, so you can run a decent sized cam in here and still have clearance. Got a very thick top portion there for the ringland, which that's a known issue on the LS. If you don't have your ring gap right, you'll pinch the rings and it'll break the ringland off. So having a substantial ringland in your aftermarket piston is a nice feature. 5/1000 over. Got a nice skirt coating on there. Got some oil drain back holes. Yeah, some nice features on this one. So they do mark them for orientation, just like most manufacturers do. They laser etch there, so left side forward, right side forward. You know where to land when you're putting these together, where to put them position-wise on the engine. These are really nice. I wanted to take a minute and talk about the 4032 alloy. So some guys might want to knock these because they're 4032 instead of 2618. A lot of your like really high performance aftermarket pistons are 2618 forged aluminum alloy. And that's like the highest strength, but there are some trade-offs versus 4032. One of those being that 4032 it has less thermal expansion, so you can run tighter wall clearance. So on a street-driven application, something that's going to see some mileage, the 4032 alloy is usually going to yield a quieter engine, at least at cold start, because you don't have to run as much wall clearance because of thermal expansion as you would with 2618. In addition to that, the 4032 is generally lighter too, so you can run a lighter weight piston, less reciprocating mass, and that's another advantage that interested me. So for a street application, if you're not really trying to push the envelope in terms of horsepower, you're not running super high boost, then the 4032 is actually my choice for most kind of street strip combinations. And I'm glad that that's what these are offered in my case, because the lighter weight and the less thermal expansion is exactly what I'm looking for. Now the trade-off there is the 4032 can be a little bit more brittle than the 2618, which is why they generally are regarded as not being able to hold quite as much power. But for what I'm planning, sub 1,000 horsepower at the wheels, nothing wrong with the 4032 alloy, and there's actually some net benefit to it, like I mentioned already. So let's get these put back in the box. I'll get them all out, take some nice pictures of them, show it all laid out here in just a minute, but we got to unbox the ring pack, show you guys that real quick, kind of the last piece of the puzzle. All right, let's take a look at the rings. So I went with Hastings. This company has been around for a long time. They're actually the private label supplier for a lot of the big name piston manufacturers as well, and I think they do some OEM supply too, but again, been around a long time, US company, made in the USA, and I have no hesitancy running Hastings rings. I think they're some of the best on the market. So I went with Plasma Moly ring pack on this one. Plasma Moly tends to break in a little bit quicker. It's a little bit softer, so it will mesh with the cylinder walls on a fresh rebuild quicker and get you a ring seal that is a little bit less finicky than some of the other ring material options are. So Plasma Moly is my choice on most combinations, unless we're talking about extreme high horsepower stuff. And Hastings kind of labels these and individually bags them. So the third position is going to be all your oil control stuff. There should be probably a few bags of that. Top compression ring, second ring, everything comes sealed. I have cracked these open already just to check them in. But it is nice that they separate them so you don't have to sit there and measure them or try to determine what's what. So you can see, maybe on the video, not sure, but you can see that these are tapered on one side, so orientation is something you need to pay attention to when these go together. I'll have to look at the paperwork on these to see exactly which way they go. Refresh my memory there. These are 1.5 millimeter top, 1.5 millimeter second ring. Now it doesn't look like the second ring has as much taper. Maybe a slight little bit. Again, you can find documentation if it doesn't come with the rings, which it did in this case, down at the bottom. If it didn't come with the rings, you can usually find this online. But in here, it'll tell you all of the specs, how it needs to be set up, how it's marked, how it's oriented. Probably what they recommend for gap, I would imagine. Although that might be in the piston info, but that's going to tell you how to orient everything and what it should look like when it's together. And then last but not least, oil control parts. Those are your retaining portions for the oil control ring and the oil control rings themselves. So let's get this all laid out. You can see it all together, and we'll get some pictures and whatnot for social media and get this posted up for you guys. Here's a look at that crankshaft that we're going to run. Nice fresh surfaces. The connecting rod journals were polished. The main journals had to be taken 0.010 over because they had some wear. It looked like the bearings had been starved a little bit of oil and it ended up scoring up the main, so they had to turn those 10 for me, but it ended up coming out really nice. And on this one, I did save some cost, given that my neighbor 2 doors down happened to run crankshaft grinding business. He kind of gave me the friends and family discount on this one. You can check that out. Real nice finish on there. All right, well, I know that was a lot of talking, a lot of discussion, but I really wanted to kind of lay the groundwork for this build so you guys could understand how I came to the decision that I came to and why we decided on the particular components that we chose. I wanted to include you guys kind of in the journey for part selection of this build as well. So I wanted to outline everything I considered, why I eliminated some options, and ultimately why I chose some others. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much. And be sure to subscribe and follow along because we're getting ready to get into the exciting portion of the build. We've got the block coming back from machining. We're going to show how to prep that block, measure that block, check all bearing clearances, and get to the good stuff and start assembling. So again, if you guys have any questions or if you want to discuss it anymore, drop it in the comments. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.